Hi, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast. I'm Kristan Hawkins. Today, we have a very special guest, one of our board members of Students for Life, and the new president of the Young America's Foundation, Governor Scott Walker. Governor, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Glad to be with you.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you about this new position. You've taken over the helm of YAF. You guys you've been just unveiled this whole new project. I love the ad. It was on, I think I saw you on Fox News on TV. I was like, wait a minute, there's Governor Walker. Can you tell everyone what you all are up to over at Young America's Foundation? I love YAF, what you're all doing. I'm a YAF speaker. I think it's so important that pro-life students, conservative students work together on campuses. But what is this new program that you guys have launched and why?
Yeah, well, the first part is, of course, Young America's Foundation is all about training the next generation of freedom fighters. And a big part of that cause is supporting the pro-life movement for sure. That's been a proud part of YAF's tradition for many, many years, long decades before I've gotten here. But right now at the long game, what we've found, and you've found this as well with Students for Life and your activism, is that increasingly on college campuses across America, we've found that it's not just a bias that's out there. It's not even just political correctness. It's outright cancel culture that we've seen time and time again. If you're pro-life, if you're Christian, if you show any number of other conservative positions, you don't just get kind of pushed to the corner, you get outright silenced. And so the long game really is a reflection that those who oppose us on these issues have have been doing this for decades. This didn't just happen overnight. It didn't happen by accident. They've had a long-term plan. And so to counter this, it's going to take more than just a news cycle, probably more than even just a presidential cycle. It is indeed going to take a long game. And that's what we're doing. It's a 12-point action plan to really win not just the battles of the day, but the war for the heart and soul of our republic.
Yeah, that's so important. I remember we were talking about this not long ago. We were together in Florida, and I was so excited about what you all are doing because the cancel culture that we're seeing on our campuses, this wasn't just an overnight thing. And I think a lot of people think that it just sort of happened overnight. The cancel culture came and it was like, no, this was a strategic advance that the left has made in taking over campuses to silence the opposition. And now they feel more, emboldened than ever before. And it is going to take a long game approach to combat this.
Well, exactly. The whole mindset is on any number of issues is that they don't want anyone, but particularly not young people, to have access to the other side of the equation. We know personally, for example, when it comes to the right to life issue, that we saw this a few years ago when Ralph Northam went on DC radio, didn't even think about it, I'm sure, but when he went and just said out loud what many, we believe, have thought for some time, and talked about a child being born and then being set aside, held, made comfortable, and then the family and the doctor would decide what to do. Not only was that jarring for those of us who are pro-life, what we saw in the weeks and months after that was two big groups shifted away from the more radical pro-abortion position to the pro-life position. It was self-identified Democrat voters, and most interesting to me, it was young people, because they could see, despite what they were being told and many other college campuses, despite they were being told in the media, when they heard this firsthand, just how gruesome this was to hear about a baby being born and still maybe even thinking about ending the life of that child under the guise of abortion. The young people get this. There's a sense of fairness out here. And what we found is time and time again, if we get the facts out to them, this was a prime case. It wasn't even just all of us doing it. It just poured right out into the public, and it was irrefutable what their viewpoint was. We can win on issues like this, but we have to have a level playing field. So a big part of what we're doing is not only expanding the number of students, expanding the number of events, expanding the number of partnerships, it's even aggressively going out and seeking out people for free speech battles. We won a big one recently at the University of California, Berkeley of all places, as radical as that is. They tried to stop Ben Shapiro from coming in per the request of some of our students. They don't outright block it. They claim they're for free speech, but what they do is they put up all these unrealistic barriers. You couldn't have it after 3 in the afternoon. They couldn't advertise. They had to have security costs that were 3 times more than what they charged a group on the left to bring in a U.S. Supreme Court justice. All of that was unrealistic. And in the end, we took them to court, invoked the First Amendment, and won. And now they've had to back away from those positions. If we can win at Berkeley, we can win anywhere in the country. We're going to proactively seek this out because that's what many of the radicals are trying to do, is just cancel
Yeah.
this entire discussion.
Yeah, I think that's so important. We saw a case, University of Northern Iowa, right before the election, where the student body voted that the pro-life group was, disinvited to campus, wasn't allowed to organize, and said that they were racist for being pro-life. And, it took a letter to the administration, clarifying what the Constitution says in the First Amendment. And then suddenly the administration was willing to kind of, oh, yeah, that's right, you can't do that, student government. But we're going to see this over and over again. And what I've been trying to tell our student leaders and pro-life activists across the country is the only person that can cancel you is yourself. They're going to try to cancel you, and they're going to try to beat you into submission, that you walk away from this. And you can't let that happen. You can't allow that to happen. And so I think I love what you all are doing. Don't you guys have like a hotline with the long game too, where students can call?
Yeah, we have a campus tip hotline and we've had, it's been unbelievably used, and we're trying to amp it up as part of the long game. But we get these examples of professors who say, if you're pro-life, if you take other conservative positions, you're going to fail my class, or you can't be in the class, or we won't allow your chapter to be organized. And again, our view is not only do we like UIF chapters, we want to be partnered with Students for Life. We want to be partnered with other similar organizations out on campus. And by the way, we're willing to help anyone and everyone, not just our chapters, not just our students when it comes to free speech battles. But I'll give you a good example. Same state, shockingly, not in the East Coast or West Coast, San Francisco or New York, but our tip line normally is radical college professors, cancel culture, ridiculous positions by the administration or student government. But at Iowa State earlier this year, we had a student contact us via the tip line. This student was talking about the local school district, where in Ames, Iowa, of all places, they partnered with BLM for a BLM Week of Action as part of Black History Month. Okay, Black History Month sounds credible, except for the fact that what they were doing had next to nothing to do with Black history, and it was all a part of this radical indoctrination. So much so, they were working with everywhere from preschool to 12th grade. And for the preschool and kindergarten students, they literally gave them coloring pages with transgender figures on them, saying the kids could pick whether they wanted to be a boy or a girl or somewhere in between. That has no place in school, particularly not in those early ages. And we exposed that to make sure it didn't happen elsewhere and to push back on it. But this is just how far some of those radical elements are going out there. And they do it on issue after issue after issue. And unfortunately, a lot of folks just feel intimidated. And that's what the left's trying to do with cancel culture. Be afraid to speak up, think that you're alone. It applies not just to students. We see it with administrators. We see it with educators. We see it with parents. They feel like they're intimidated because they think they're the only one who feels this way. We know with the long game, the more we get the word out, not only support students, educators, teachers, professors, parents as well, that we can bind together and push back on these radical positions.
Well, I think what you're saying is so important because, we've noticed in the past, and I've certainly noticed this, that at Students for Life, we have young people joining Students for Life groups, leading Students for Life groups from diverse backgrounds, diverse political backgrounds, diverse religious backgrounds. And we want that in the pro-life movement. We want people from all walks of life, all political opinions to join us. Now, I will, just as a word of warning, I will try to convert you to become a Christian conservative. Absolutely. But we welcome you into the movement. But sometimes I hear the argument, from pro-life young people and just pro-lifers in general. In fact, I recently did an event for the Canadian March for Life, and I was hearing from one of the other speakers sort of this like, it was kind of this negativity towards the political, why be involved in politics. And, especially when you see what's happening in Canada. I mean, everything that we're experiencing here in the States happened in Canada 10, 15 years ago, we saw on campuses. Now it's much, much worse in Canada. I mean, you're getting arrested. Students for Life groups are just getting outright banished just for simply being pro life. No other reason even necessary or to be made up other than that they're anti abortion violence. But I think it's a perfect example of why we need to be involved in the political and speaking up and standing up for our rights to free speech. Because if we don't, this is exactly how they'll silence us. What do you say to pro-life young people that you might meet on a campus when you're there speaking for YAF, or someone who kind of laments that, well, I just wish the pro-life movement would just stay here helping moms and babies and would stay the hell away from all things political?
Well, you got to do all the above, and you got to be involved in every battle. We can't just pick or choose, or they'll win a battle here, a battle there, and suddenly we're surrounded, and we're
Yeah.
not able to fight back on the bigger issue. And this is not new, Kristen, as you know. I started out before I was involved in anything political, any party or other political organization. I started out at Marquette Students for Life as one of the early leaders on campus there, just because to me it all starts and ends with life,
Mm.
from conception through the time when the good Lord calls us home naturally, and not through some of these crazy assisted suicide ideas out there. So
Mm.
I get that. I understand that. When I was a student, I heard some of that as well. And again, we, like you, we welcome people no matter what their background, Democrat, Republican, whether you're a Christian or not. We wanted everyone in the cause, and we still want that today. But two things I think go to the heart of your question. One, I think anyone can be for free speech. Anyone can believe that it's right to have a level playing field and equal opportunity for people to speak out about issues. That is an inherently American idea. It's why our founders not only implicitly included it in the Constitution, it's why they clearly spelled it out in the Bill of Rights, in the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. So it's guaranteed in the Constitution. It's not just some law, it is a permanent part of our Constitution. It is guaranteed. It should be revered on our college campuses, but
Mm.
sadly, it's most under assault. So I think no matter where you sit on other issues politically, everyone can agree with that. Even the people I vehemently disagree with, a guy like Bill Myers at HBO has wisely said you can't have this cancel culture because that's just not America. That's what happens in these oppressive societies, either in the far right or the far left around the world. So one, free speech should be a gimme. That's something everybody should be for, the right for people to speak out. And that's how, on an issue like the right to life position, how we win is if we have anything close to a level playing field and we talk from the heart, not just from the head, we can win over people who care about social justice, who care about fairness. We can win that issue, which leads to the second point. And that is, we shouldn't just stop at saying we should have free speech. We should be unequivocal on these core issues. Again, abortion being a good example of this. When I talked about what Ralph Northam said and continued to on campuses, I don't beat around the bush. I know you don't either. I said, in fact, for a while, I got reprimanded on Twitter for pointing this out, but it's absolutely true. If the family in the situation that Ralph Northam talked about waited a couple hours and went home from the hospital and did the same thing they were talking about doing at the hospital, that family would be charged with homicide in states
Mm.
all across America. Why? Because it wasn't just live birth abortion, it wasn't just infanticide, it was murder. You're
Mhm.
killing an unborn human being. And at a time when people last year have talked a lot about science, science clearly shows that an unborn human being is just that. They're a human being. An unborn baby is a human being, and they deserve to be protected just like anyone else.
That's absolutely right. That's a great point that you made there. So, as part of this long game initiative, you guys did some survey research into young people. And we've been doing this at Students for Life. We just released a big poll in January of 18 to 34-year-olds. Um, what did you find in your polling? When did you do your polling, and what were the kind of the key takeaways? Because I'm interested to learn, because I think that's
Yeah.
probably part of this launch.
Well, you're right, and it does tie into the absolute need for the long game, and it ties in with the kind of research you've done as well in the past. And it's important to do that. We did an update. We did a number of polls last year during the pandemic. because we thought with campuses closed by and large across the country, we need to keep our finger on the pulse of both high school and college age students. So it was a very comprehensive poll. We just got out of the field earlier this week and was done last week and this week. It was 800 out of a general population. So it's not of our students. It's not a bias one way or the other. It was random general population, 800 high school age students, about 800 college age students. Asked them a series of questions, followed up with questions that were asked last year in polling. And there's bad and there's good news that comes out of this. The bad news, from my point of view, is that students not only are what we would many would call progressive or liberal, but they've gotten more so in the past year. We see it an issue after issue after issue after issue out there. The good news is what we also found is when you follow up on these questions and you give those same students some specific information, new facts that they may not be getting at school or in social media or elsewhere, there's a dramatic shift in opinion. And a lot of it ties into fairness. That, for example, if you ask about student loan debt, not surprisingly, over 60% of the students surveyed said absolutely they want the federal government to write off their student loan debt. Not a big shock, particularly for those college age students. But then if you follow up and ask a question, do you think that someone who did not go to college should have to pay taxes to pay for the federal government relieving college students of their student loan debt? More than half of the respondents said no, they didn't think that was fair either. And so, excuse me, it's a good example of where, and not that student loan debt isn't a real issue, I think it is, but it just, on that specific question, it was a good reminder that if people only hear one point of view and they don't have context to think, well, how would that affect anyone else? They're going to have a very clear point of position. If though you offer up other information to factor into their decision making, it had about a 20-point drop in terms of support because people, by and large, haven't heard that. It goes back to my point about cancel culture. The analogy I gave earlier today, I was talking to someone. It's not quite the same, but there's a reason why in most large urban areas across America that have professional sports teams, that almost everybody in those communities is a fan of that team and not of other teams across the nation, with a few exceptions. That's because growing up, that's all you hear about is the local team. And that's great. That's fun. There's a lot of benefit to that, hometown pride and so forth. But you can see on college campuses and even in schools and culture, if all young people hear is strictly one point of view, you can see why they gravitate towards that position. But once they hear about something else, once they hear more facts, particularly if it's not just facts, but if there's emotion, some talking from the heart that ties into that. I said one of the big complaints I've had over the years is that conservatives think and talk with their head. The other side thinks and talks with their heart. We should always think with facts. We should use our head, but we should tell it in ways that are compassionate, that go from the heart. I know over the years, and many examples, but one of the ones I've always been compelled with looking at Student for Life activities is when someone talks about their own situation, the choice that they thought that they had and how they walked away from that. I was just one of our former staff members left in an Esther type moment to go lead a crisis pregnancy center not too far from where Young America's Foundation headquarters are. She asked me to come and speak at one of their events not too long ago. And the young woman I sat with made that kind of decision to stand for life. But it was tough because she got all this pressure. She got pressure from the father of her child. She got pressure from her family. She got pressure from her friends. She made the right choice in the end. But people like her are just so compelling because we can talk about science, we can talk about the facts, but when you talk about a mother making an incredibly difficult but vital decision to protect life, boy, that's hard to argue against.
That's absolutely right. Wow. So, I mean, when you're looking at the polling, it's interesting when you said that about the student loan debt, where they generally like the idea of somebody else paying for their college, but then you ask them about a specific person or someone didn't go to college, they say, well, that's not fair either. And I think that's important. Fairness is an important concept. We talk a little bit about that in the pro-life movement of, is this fair to a preborn human being who maybe just has an extra chromosome and you're discriminating against that human being and saying that human being should be aborted? But I also think it's interesting that, when you think about this young people voting block, which is, the most liberal voting block, you often hear these sort of things that come out, even amongst pro life students, that phrases or conversations that sort of lean, I would say, socialist.
Yeah.
They lean very pro socialist in rhetoric of, well, I am so pro life. I believe the government should pay for X, Y, Z. And the more government programs we have, the less abortions there will be. So,
Mhm.
therefore, in order to be pro life, we need to be for more government handouts, more checks, more crappy, failing schools in inner cities, not school choice. What do you say when you talk to somebody like that, a pro life person who is clearly guided by compassion for the
Mhm.
preborn, for mothers, for families, wants to help them, but is a little misguided in the prescription or the remedy that they should be deploying or advocating for?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. Well, and I think part of it is overall, it's a lesson I took as a young man from coming of age under President Reagan. It's not just why I'm a conservative today, largely because of his influence, but because I'm an optimist. He was a happy warrior. He talked about America as
Yeah.
a shining city on the hill. He talked about things that were aspirational. That's a big part of our long game, is to contrast. I think students overall, what we find in the data, and we found this even in some of the discussions we've had with people who've been working, for example, with former Vice President Mike Pence, have validated this as well. That young people, particularly college age students, feel there's a lot of divisiveness, and they don't like that in our country. And so I love to point out that if you look at that issue, what we're talking about is very unifying. We love America. We love America so much that it doesn't matter whether you're black or white, young or old, rich or poor, whether you were born here or legally came here from somewhere else. We want you and your family to have the same access to the freedoms and liberties that our parents and grandparents passed on to our generation, and we hope to pass on to future generations. We need to show our love, not just for our country and our own family, but for everyone else as well. And so part of it is, I think, going into these discussions, um, not just with an open mind, but with a heart that's open to share that love and compassion, not only for the unborn, but for our fellow citizen, and share
Mm,
that. And then going into that, then you can make the case, when you show how much you care,
mm,
you and the passion and the love that you have. And we do. My goodness, sometimes I have to remind people. I said part of the reason why we fight so hard for this country, this beloved country of America,
that's right.
is because of the love and the passion. We just had one of our first in-person events a couple months ago in Miami, in part because thanks to Ron DeSantis, the state is open and healthy and operating and free. But we also went to Miami because I thought it was so important for our students to hear firsthand the stories of people whose families have come from Cuba. We had a speaker whose family came from Venezuela to talk about the oppression that they saw in socialist countries. And to heart of your question, when you talk about things like, free health care, free housing, all these other things, we can point to example after example in truly socialist countries where they promise power to the people, but instead the people get crumbs. There's just massive poverty in places like Cuba and Venezuela these days. We saw it years ago in the old Soviet Union and Eastern Germany. And instead, all too often, the elite few get the power and all the
Right.
riches. And it got back so bad in Venezuela that 9 out of 10 Venezuelans in a country that just a decade and a half ago was one of the wealthiest in the world. Now, 9 out of 10 people in that country live in absolute poverty, so bad that the average Venezuelan in the last few years has lost about 20 pounds a year because of malnutrition and deprivation. So, telling stories like that from not just a fact-based standpoint, but an emotional one from the heart to say, yeah, I appreciate that you want to take care of your fellow citizen. I appreciate that you love people. And uh, my contention would be if you look at the natural outcome of these ideas and how they've worked elsewhere in the country, the best way to care for your neighbor is to help him or her get the skills that they need to be gainfully employed. Yeah, when they need help, give them help, but help from the government should be more like a trampoline and less like a hammock. And that's the way to provide true long term assistance. I've said all along, true freedom and prosperity don't come from the clumsy hand of the government. They come from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destinies through the dignity that's born of hard work. And that's something that's probably as passionate as anything you can do.
That's perfect. That bam, mic drop. That's it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, that's something that I just hear all the time, and I try to say, I understand where you're coming from, but I also care. That's why I'm a conservative. That's why, and we may actually disagree about different policy prescriptions to solve, you know, poor educational options and outcomes in inner cities, but that doesn't mean that one side or the other cares less. That we actually, as conservatives, political conservatives, we care, but we've seen something different, and we're worried about our countrymen. We love our countrymen. We want everyone to succeed and to flourish. And you can make
Absolutely.
an
Well,
argument that that's a pro-life view.
yeah, good example of that. You know me over the years. My dad, who's now with the Lord, but my father was a minister for many, many years, a small town in south central Wisconsin. And I remember when I was a kid, there were certain people who frequently would come through town. They'd stop not only with my dad's church, but other churches asking for help and assistance. And my father made a general practice, other than maybe someone whose family had a car that broke down where they had a fund to help out. But if someone was coming through asking for some money to help on their way, he was willing to help them out, but particularly for people who were working age, able-bodied adults. His general rule of thumb was he'd help, and there was a fund the church had to do that. But in return, he asked for something. It might be as simple as the church needed help raking the leaves, or
Mm.
needed some help maybe painting a door, or doing any number of other things. And there's a certain dignity that comes from that, of not just giving things away but expecting it.
Mm.
I learned, in addition to, one of the cool things Young America's Foundation has is we own and operate the Reagan Ranch out in Santa Barbara, the place where the president, former first lady, lived and called home even during the presidency. Just this year, we also took over operations of the boyhood home where President Reagan grew up in
Mm.
Dixon, Illinois. And one of the amazing things was his mother had this remarkable influence on him, not just as a person, not just as a politics, but as a Christian. She was clear the
Mm.
reason why he and his brother were baptized in the church a few blocks down from their home. But one of the cool things is in the kitchen, they were, raising their kids during the Depression, and so they didn't have a lot of money. So Mrs. Reagan would take on all sorts of odd jobs, and one of the things she did was she would often sing at weddings and funerals. And often, as it was in the Midwest during the Depression, many times people just didn't have the money to pay the fee that she had. And so she was a very generous woman, but she also understood people's dignity. And so in this glass cabinet are an assortment of teacups and saucers that would go underneath. And what the president's mother would do back in the day was, if someone just couldn't afford to pay the fee, she'd say, "Well, that's okay." She said, "But what I want you to do is, when you have a little bit of change, sometime when you're at a rummage sale somewhere around the area, is to find a tea saucer and cup and bring it to me because I collect them." Well, she really did that just as a way to make them have that dignity. They weren't just
Mm.
they weren't just giving away something; that there was some dignity, and they had to do something to get the support that she provided in the service of that song, singing at that service. Of course, then she added to it. The story goes that she would pray for each of those people that they might get back up on their feet again and succeed. And she looked at each of those teacups every day and prayed for each one of them. But it was just a powerful reminder that about the dignity that comes from work, about if you're
That's right.
writing people off without giving them away, whether it's monetarily or through work or other ways, you're really selling them short, and you're not helping them out in the long run.
That's absolutely right. And I love that story. That's such a neat story. Actually, I passed through Illinois, and I saw on the side of the road Lincoln's Boyhood Home. I mean, Reagan's Boyhood Home, and I was like,
Yeah.
I wonder if YAF is involved with that. I almost made my husband turn around, but he said we can't turn around with the camper and bring everybody. So hopefully we'll make it through there in Illinois sometime. Thank you so much for coming on today and talking a little bit about what you're doing at YAF. I think it's very, very important, especially with all the attacks coming from the left in Washington, D.C., that the pro-life and the conservative movement continue to work together. And you don't, like I said, you don't have to be conservative to be pro-life, but we want you to be conservative, and we want to win you over, and we want that chance to win you over. But I do think we have some natural allies and some natural partners, and we certainly have some friends over at Young America's Foundation. I'm here at the Turning Point USA headquarters. They're letting me use Charlie's studio, so we have some friends over here at Turning Point. I think we need to build relationships everywhere we can, because we've got to stick together, and we all agree and the value, the dignity that of every human being, that we all have value, and that every human being should be protected, and that we should have an America that protects every human person and promotes human flourishing. So I'm really excited for what you're doing at YAF. I cannot wait to get back on some of the campuses, speaking with YAF chapters. Hopefully we can get YAF and Students for Life working together more in the future. We hope to see you guys at the National Pro-Life Summit. But thank you so much, Governor, for all that you're doing, and I can't wait to work with you.
Well, we're looking forward to continuing to work with you personally, as well as with Students for Life, not only the national organization, but with all the Student for Life chapters across the country. If folks want a copy of our long game, we'll send you a copy either digitally or a hard copy. Just go to yaf.org/long game. We'll send you a copy today, and let's move forward and keep fighting for freedom, particularly for the unborn.
How does everyone follow you? You're on Twitter, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at Scott Walker. So you can follow me there. YAF is at YAF. And of course, on Facebook at Scott K. Walker, on Instagram, and just about everything else these days. So in fact, just did my podcast today too, as well. So I'm up on YouTube as well as all the platforms. So love being on with you today, as we've been on the past, and look forward to working more with Students for Life and the pro-life cause in the future.
Excellent. That's so exciting. And I know I follow you somewhere. I just couldn't remember which platform I follow you, because I love your daily scripture you put up, the
Thank you.
daily scripture verse, and then the zingers against the leftists. So I also enjoy that too. Scripture and zingers against leftists, always a good thing. So thanks for joining us. Thank you all for tuning in this week at Explicitly Pro-Life. Make sure you share this episode with your friends and family, and start talking about why we need to fight back against cancel culture. And remember, like, no one really can cancel you except yourself. So don't let yourself get canceled as a pro-lifer, as a conservative. Thanks, guys.